Story 1. Don't leave your room after 3 a.m. If you do, run. I've grown up in the same house ever since birth. When I was little, my childhood was like every other. On my 5th birthday, the night I was getting tucked in for bed, my parents strictly told me to never leave my room after 3 a.m. I never really woke up in the middle of the night, so I had no problem with it and simply thought it was normal. A couple of years later, when I was 13, I randomly started thinking about it and decided to ask my parents. My parents were smiling and having fun making lunch, but when I asked, why can't I leave my room after 3 a.m., their faces turned pale and serious. They got nervous and simply said, "Don't worry about it, you're too young." I didn't want to be a brat, so I turned around and went back to my room. That night, I woke up to a loud crash in the living room. My parents had gone to see my grandparents, and I guess they stayed the night too. I had a dry throat, and I thought they only told me not to leave after 3 a.m. because it was late and they didn't want to wake me up. Maybe it's the cat, I said to myself. God, was I wrong? I shook as I heard large footsteps in the living room walking around, but I thought it could have been my brother. I turned and walked out of my room, forgetting it was 3:17. I slithered down the hall into the kitchen to get a glass of water. As I walked back to my room, I saw some sort of creature standing in the kitchen. I was so horrified I dropped my glass and couldn't move. It had blood dripping from its bones. It seemed deformed. I squinted, trying to see more of what it looked like, but it tilted its head and grinned so wide that it wasn't physically possible for a human to do that. It got on all fours and crawled so fast. I bolted into my room and locked the door. I grabbed everything I needed and ran to the bathroom in my room. I grabbed my cat and locked that door too. A few minutes passed, and the door to my room broke. Now, the creature was banging on the bathroom door. I shook in fear, wondering what would happen if it broke through, but then the banging stopped. I heard a window break and what sounded like the front door closing. It left. I'm guessing it goes from house to house in the neighborhoods and streets of Los Lunas, New Mexico. I'm now 16, and I never leave my room after 3 a.m. until I see sunlight. If you are in Los Lunas, New Mexico, I suggest you take my advice and never do that. If you do, be prepared to run. Story 2, my short scary story for which I cannot find an explanation. Hello, dear people of Reddit. I would like to share a creepy story that has been bugging and making me paranoid for quite some time now. Just to clarify, I am a male, and this happened to me when I was 16 in May. It was just another regular day at school. I had exited my bus and began walking home. The path isn't that long, so it only takes me about 12 minutes to get there. I kept walking as usual. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. At some point, there is a very narrow road that leads between two buildings, so cars have to go through them. I always walk on the edge of the building so the cars can easily pass me. There was one car that I hadn't seen around my area before. I didn't see it, I just heard it behind me. As usual, I moved to the right side of the road so the car could pass me. It did not, and that had happened before, so I thought the driver was just being careful, since you could damage your car fairly easily. Again, there was a small opening, and I moved to the right, clearly signaling with my body language to the driver that he could pass me. He did not. He was just slowly driving behind me. At that point, I started getting paranoid. Something like this had never happened to me before, and the driver or the people in the car clearly wanted something from me. Just to clarify, there wasn't a single other person or car nearby. I quickened my pace. I eventually exited the narrow road and came upon an opening. You could either turn left or right, but drivers could also turn around on the same road and go back the way they came. I walked on the right path, and at that point, I heard a shout behind me. It was a male voice, and he said, "Hey." It was an angry and rude voice. I did not turn around. I just kept speed walking. The weirdest thing came next. The car had turned around and driven back to the narrow road. I couldn't see his registration number because he drove off too quickly, nor did I ever see it again. I kept looking back because I didn't want him to know where I lived. There could have been many different possibilities. Maybe he was a friend of mine and just wanted to say hello, but if he was, he wouldn't have shouted at me like that. Another theory is that he wanted to ask me for directions. That has happened to me before, but people were always very friendly. I want to believe this explanation. On a darker note, that could have been an attempted robbery or, even worse, a kidnapping. I don't know. Am I being paranoid? I just want to find a good explanation for this. AMA. Story 3, Red Door, Yellow Door Experience. First, let me say do not try this. I was so skeptical and thought it was complete bullshit until we tried it, and I will never mess with demonic shit like this ever again. So, I was at my friend's beach house, and it was me, her, and my sister. They decided to play Red Door, Yellow Door, and I was the one that recorded the entire thing. My friend laid down in my sister's lap, and we followed detailed instructions from another Reddit post on how to play the game. We turned off all the lights, and my sister chanted, "Red door, yellow door, any other colored door," for about 7 minutes. My friend had her eyes closed and was in a deep, relaxed state, almost like a trance. My sister asked her if she saw anything, and my friend said she saw a yellow rectangle that resembled a door. So we kept going until she said she saw an extremely dark hallway. My sister told her to walk through it, and my friend said she saw a yellow door. We were unaware that yellow doors are dangerous and should not be entered. It means the game went wrong, and we should have woken her up from her trance. This is when things started going wrong. She walked through the door and said she saw a room full of TV static. She walked out and saw a woman in a Victorian nightgown, frail with no face, in the hall. We later discovered that this was experienced by many others, and seeing that woman means we should have woken her up. But we didn't know, so we kept going. She said she saw another yellow door and approached it, but as soon as she said that, she began squirming. My sister told her not to go in if she felt uncomfortable, which is what the rules said. Then she saw a tall man in the hall wearing black fancy attire, and that was the one thing we knew was dangerous. She said he appeared at the end of the hall, but she didn't feel afraid because 1. He wasn't in a room where he could trap her, and 2. My friend is just really brave and rarely gets scared. However, right after this, she screamed and began seizing, so we woke her up. She said he randomly appeared in her face, almost like a jump scare in a movie. Anyway, I don't know how the game works, and if you read the detailed rules about the game, you won't believe it's real either. But everything that people said would happen, happened. I honestly couldn't sleep last night trying to figure out how this works. People say it's hypnosis, but how did my friend see everything that everyone else saw? And we didn't even know what others saw until we looked it up after the game. Story 4, The House Across the Street. My wife and I spent years searching for a starter home. Finding the right home can be a difficult process, but we had the added challenge of being on an extremely tight budget and only qualifying for a loan that allowed rural housing. That basically drew a large circle around most of the communities in our area and said, "You can't buy there." It was just as well, as I preferred the quiet life of country living. One place in particular caught our interest. It was located in a small village called Wright, in the middle of orchard country. The town consisted of one old church with a cemetery, a bar, and a smattering of old houses. It seemed perfect. We looked at the home and thought it would suit our needs nicely. The only catch was that the 2 current residents were technically squatting there. It's been a long time, so I don't remember the exact details, but I think they had been renting from the actual homeowner and had stopped making payments. Either way, the house would have to go through a short sale, and the renters/squatters would be evicted before we could take possession. We were weary from looking for so long, and we thought it was a really cool setting, so we decided to go for it. The tenants seemed nice, so we thought they would leave peacefully and not trash the house. Fortunately, we had no issues there because we didn't make it that far. The listing agent was eccentric and rarely returned calls placed by our agent. To make a long story short, we spent 2 months trying to make progress with the purchase. Our offer was accepted, but nothing else happened. Every time we spoke with our realtor, she told us she couldn't reach the listing agent, or he was being evasive. Eventually, we had enough and backed out of the deal. At the time, we were sad it didn't go through. Fast forward roughly a month. We were watching TV in our duplex one evening when the old house directly across the street from the one we attempted to buy showed up on the screen. It was on fire. Apparently, the 20-year-old kid living there had shot 3 of his family members to death, then burned the house down in an attempt to destroy the evidence. He fled the area and was on the run for a while. We couldn't believe it. Shivers ran down my spine when I thought about the fact that we could have been 20 feet from a multiple homicide. No, the violence didn't spread to our house, but it was definitely close enough. I still get creeped out when I think about that, even 13 years later. Story 5. I was hunted through the woods by a man who wanted to murder me. So, this happened 2 days ago. I, 25F, was on a date with a girl, 21F, let's call her Lex, and it was going super well. We had been talking for the better part of a year. Her coworker invited us and her roommate, 25M, let's call him Kyle, to a party. It went great, and on our way back, he drove in front of us while we followed him on her motorcycle. This is where it all went wrong. He randomly turned into a parking lot, so we followed him, and it turns out he was passed out in the driver's seat. We did not realize he was this drunk. Lex tried to wake him up, and when he got out of the car, he just started beating the shit out of her. So I ran over, pulled him off her, and started beating him. I put up a good fight until he took me to the ground and started strangling me. Then, he grabbed me by the hair and started bashing my face into the pavement repeatedly. Also, this guy is 6 feet 2 inches and I'm 5 feet 3 inches. I started to fight back harder to get him to stop because I thought he was going to kill me. I clocked him really hard, and he stood up, bleeding all over me, and said, "I'm going to fucking kill you." At this point, Lex picked me up from the ground and just screamed, "Run." So we ran in opposite directions into the woods, and he followed me. I was much faster, so I was hiding in the woods while he walked around, going, "Oh, Gabby, fake name, come out wherever you are. I'm gonna fucking kill you." So, I wound up army crawling through the woods so he couldn't see me, and hiding there until I couldn't hear him anymore. Lex ran the opposite direction, wound up by the road, and flagged down a stranger to call the cops. They came and found me hiding in the woods. He broke her jaw and may have fractured my skull, waiting on the CT results. So yeah, hands down the most terrifying thing I've ever been through.